Hey, looks like we are live. Welcome to another joint edition of The Bitter Pill, and Jerry's Take on China. I'm Jeff Melton here in the United States, and Jerry is in southeastern China. Is it Zhongshan? Um,
Zhongshan,
yes,
yeah, in
Zhongshan.
Guangdong province, where if anybody's following the media about China right now, it's where all the floods are and
Oh
all that
goodness.
kind of stuff. But everything is okay here in Zhongshan. We had one suburb which got a little flooded, nothing serious. So far as I'm aware, nobody has died in this city. There's 4 million people here, so I might not have heard, but so far nobody has died. It's been quite well managed this year. But then there was that massive landslide in Meizhou, which is about 3 hours drive from here, where 48 people died. So it happens every year. It happens in different places every year in China. It's not controllable. It's not a signal that China is failing or anything like that. Nature has taken its course, and it's caused a big problem in some parts of southern China. But for us here in Zhongshan, a lot of rain. But I've actually not even seen a flooded road yet, and I've been out cycling almost every day.
Huh. Well, that's
Mm.
good. Yeah, we've had quite a bit of rain here as well. I think last month we got more rain in the first half of the month than we usually get for the entire month of April. And last night there were tornado warnings all over the state here in Indiana.
Yeah, Guangzhou had its first tornado ever, I think.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. A lot
that's
of people captured
sensitive.
it on video. It was the first time I've never seen or heard of one in China, but a lot of people they got videos of it, and it went through an area of Guangzhou called Huadu. One of my
Yeah.
friends lives there. I'm seeing him this evening. Actually, he's coming over here for a barbecue with us. But yeah, I'm going to catch up with him and see if he actually saw it because it was very close to where he lives.
Huh. Wow.
Mm.
Yeah, it seems I don't know what the meteorological explanation for this is, but it seems like tornadoes are a very U.S. centered phenomenon. No
Mm.
idea why. And bad karma or something.
That'll teach you. Yeah.
Okay, so now that it looks like a lot of people are coming in, as you can see from the title, we're going to talk a lot about the campus protests against the Israeli genocide in Gaza and really Palestine in general. And since we are two old fogies, we can share our perspectives on how what we're seeing now compares with what we've seen in the past during our lifetimes. I personally I was a grad student at University of Illinois during the 80s when the protests for divestment from South African apartheid were going on all around the U.S. And I was mainly involved in activism around Reagan's wars in Central America, but I kept up with the divestment stuff, and it was really there was a lot going on, and it was really inspiring to see nationwide movement, and eventually they and we won. Not that South Africa is perfect by any means, but they no longer have apartheid. So before we get started, if you could just like the stream and share it. And if you haven't subscribed to either my channel, The Bitter Pill on YouTube, or Jerry's channel, Jerry's Take on China on YouTube, please do so. It helps boost us in the algorithm and get us more views. So anyway, the uh, pro, the genocide in Palestine that's been taking place over the last 7 months, or really kind of a very, very ramped up version of kind of the slow motion genocide that has been taking place there, prior to that for many decades. There have been protests of it all throughout the West, who are the governments of the West, are the perpetrators of that genocide in terms of providing funding, weapons and diplomatic support, and so on and so forth, backing it to the hilt, even at one point cutting off aid to the main relief agency in Gaza, the UN. I forget what it stands for. UNRWA.
UNRWA, yeah.
UNRWA. And so they've lost, I don't know, like several $100 million in funding, and it's really put things in dire straits. And so, yeah, you can certainly say that the U.S. and the other Western powers that did this are not just cheering on the genocide from the sidelines, or even sending them what they need to do it, but actively participating in it, helping to cut off food to Palestinians. And so here in the United States, there have been protests throughout this time, many marches in Washington, D.C. with hundreds of thousands of people, protests by Jewish Voice for Peace and other Jewish groups, basically demonstrating that the allegation that the protests that criticizing Israel is somehow anti-Semitic is ridiculous, because a lot of Jewish Americans are against what's happening, and now even in Israel there are people protesting against what the government is doing. But I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say there's a lot of large protests in Israel as well, surprisingly, and we're not hearing about that in the mainstream media like everything else. But it is on things like Twitter and YouTube. You can find large protests.
So as some of you probably know, I'm here in the hometown of a large college campus, Indiana University, where obviously there is a protest encampment, as there is lots of other places. Let me just show folks a list of all the places that there are protests going on right now, where there have been students pitching tents in the quads or whatever of colleges all across the U.S. It's quite a list. I think I counted, and this isn't complete, but I think I counted like 110 different universities. So kind of basically, if you follow American college basketball at all, most of the schools that have well-known teams are on this list. So anyway.
Yeah, that's pretty serious. It started off with about 40 of them, and I think we were hearing about Colombia because it was the biggest and I guess the most violent of them all. I wanted to cover one thing first of all before we get going into this. Many people have asked me, why aren't students in China protesting about what's happening in Gaza? And there's a very, very simple answer. It's a very simple answer. China, as a government, has been to the United Nations and said this has got to stop. It's made several proposals. It supports the two-state solution and vocally does so, and has done for many, many years. I think since it was first proposed back in the 1970s, China was on board with it immediately. And China has supported Palestine rather than Israel. China is supporting Palestine. So consequently, people in China are not angry with the government. There's no need to protest because the government and the people are aligned. And this is the only reason. The only reason you protest is because your government is not doing what you think the government should be doing. That's why people protest. It's not about what Israel's government is doing. It's about what your government is doing about it. So there's no point in protesting in China to say Israel needs to stop doing this. You protest because your government is not saying Israel needs to stop doing this. So that's the simple reason. People in China are just not, they're not, it's not that they don't care and they're not concerned about it. They're not angry with their own government. Their own government is doing all the right things. And that's why there's no protests here in China about Gaza. There could be, but there's no need to be, because if you protest, the government are going to come along and say, why are you protesting? Say, because they've got to stop you. Well, we've told them that. That's all. There's no point in doing it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's very logical. And of course, the flip side of that is that here in the United States, the U.S. government is in every way backing the genocide in Israel, including until very recently when they finally abstained, vetoing numerous ceasefire resolutions that other nations have put forth in the Security Council, where basically one state can block any action through its veto power in the Security Council, as opposed to the General Assembly of the UN, where it's more of a, it's a majority vote. But so obviously we have more reason than any country on the planet to be protesting, because here in the United States, we're the leading supplier of weapons, and they're just basically the leading diplomatic cheerleader for Israel, the leading defender of Israel militarily. When Iran retaliated for the Israeli bombing of Iran's embassy in Syria, the U.S. played a major role in trying to shoot down the Iranian drones and missiles, which they did shoot down a lot of at least the drones anyway, but it was kind of futile in the end, because Iran has missiles that can get through pretty much anything, and they fired enough of them to basically tell, as Scott Ritter said, it was kind of like Mike Tyson tapping you on the nose, and when you're trying to defend yourself from getting punched at all, and saying, see, I can hit you anytime I want, and if I want to, I can knock you the hell out anytime I want. So Iran sent that message very clearly to Israel. But anyway, my point was, the U.S. was leading the way in trying to, protect this, rabidly genocidal, fascistic regime.
Do you want to comment on the 12 senators who have threatened the International Criminal Court?
Oh, yeah. Wrong one. Let's see. Where is it? I thought somebody had commented about that, but anyway, there was a letter sent by Republican senators to, or was it representatives? I can't remember, to the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, which rumor has it that they are going to file criminal charges against Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, and various other high-ranking Israeli officials. And so the members, these 12 members of Congress, sent a threatening letter to the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, saying if something to the effect of, if you go after Netanyahu, we're going to go after you.
It actually finished with the words, "You have been warned." I've seen the letter. I've seen a copy of the letter, of course. But it finished with the words, "You have been warned." How much more mafia-esque do you get than that?
Yeah.
There you go, mafia-esque. Yes.
Exactly.
I think I just made up a new word there.
I mean, it was really just something a gangster would say. It was incredible.
Yeah.
And apparently some politicians in the U.S. have not got it through their thick heads yet that the U.S. can't just order everybody in the world around with impunity anymore.
In 2022, the Chinese government made a proposal to the United Nations to restructure the United Nations. And I'm not sure where that's going or what's going to happen with that. But I think that this situation in Gaza is a clear indicator that the current structure of the United Nations has failed in protecting people of the world. It's supposed to stop wars, but it hasn't stopped a single war. I mean, it didn't stop Korea, it didn't stop Vietnam, it didn't stop Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. It didn't stop a single thing. It hasn't stopped wars. And even when it's proposed to stop war, like Iraq in 2003, the coalition, I think there was 40 countries in that, the coalition of the willing went ahead and just did it anyway, despite not having UN approval. It really is quite frightening that the whole world is relying on this United Nations to keep peace.
Yeah.
And it's failed.
Well,
it's failed entirely.
As this person says, ICC or UN in general is a sheriff without a gun. They are structured in such a way, as I said, that the Security Council can basically veto pretty much anything. Just one country, and they, I guess if they are united in the Security Council, then they can form a military force to a UN military force to keep peace or whatever. But
the UN already has a peacekeeping force. America is the largest financial contributor to it, and China is the largest people contributor to it. China has set aside 6,000 soldiers, troops, etc., to be part. So China is doing the right thing there, and so far, I mean, somebody put up a post that said China proposed a UN full membership for Palestine, and of course that got vetoed. They're all going to get vetoed every time. As soon as they do that, then it makes Palestine into a country, a proper country, which it's not. Hi everybody, we're getting a lot of Cambodia, Australia. Wow, it's great.
Yeah. Oh, Cambodia. Yeah. Wow. All over. That's good. Gosh, I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say something, but all right. Well, anyway, maybe I should move back to talking about the protests. So yeah, there were here at Indiana University, where I was back in the early 90s, and I'm still here in town in Bloomington. They, of course, were protesting right from the start, and there were a number of clashes between the administration and faculty and students concerned about the situation in Palestine right from the very start.
We got a comment there on the flares. John Doe, I'm sorry if somebody, I am Australian, and someone said to me yesterday, if you're going to fly your helicopters off our coast, we're going to fire flares at you. Fair enough, in my opinion. No argument from me. A Chinese friend saying, what are your helicopters doing off our coast? I have no answer to that. Moving back, that looks like a Chinese guy.
Asian student at IU, I guess. So Bryce Green is a grad student here at IU who's been one of the co-organizers of the campus protest movement here, and also writes, well, as you can see there, he's written a couple of pieces for the Electronic Intifada, and also writes for Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. So he talked about how way back when all this began, after October 7th, Indiana University was already basically punishing people for speaking out about Palestine. So there was an incident where Indiana administrators suspended a tenured faculty member because he invited a speaker, I think Miko Peled, to the university. And they came up with some bullshit excuse about how he hadn't filled out the form. for the talk properly or something, and
Right.
they cancel the talk, and you know, basically because supposedly he didn't fill out the form properly, they suspended this tenured professor from his duties at the university until this fall. So I guess he's lost that much salary. I don't know, but just suspended him from his job. And then there was another incident where a art student was let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. Samia Halabi is an Indiana University alumnus who had an art exhibit scheduled to appear at have a showing at the Ashkenazi Museum of Art on campus here late last year, and the university canceled the art exhibit because it was about Palestine.
It's a fairly safe bet that a Palestinian artist is going to make art about Palestine, isn't it?
Yeah, you would think. And so where do I get rid of this at? Of course, Colombia got in on the act of repressing campus protests as well. There were a number of speakers that they canceled, and they suspended campus organizations that were involved in organizing the anti-Israeli genocide protests, Free Palestine protests. Jewish Voice for Peace, their campus chapter, and also Students for Justice in Palestine, the Columbia chapter of that, were suspended. And of course, the rhetoric all along was that these protests are anti-Semitic. It's anti-Semitic to criticize Israel and so forth. Ultimately, Congress decided to get involved when I guess the first tent encampment was at Vanderbilt, but there weren't too many after that. I can't remember if there were very many others before Columbia. But
Columbia's in New York, right?
Columbia is in New York.
Yeah.
Vanderbilt is in Tennessee.
Right.
But anyway, basically the idea was that they wanted to have a space there 24/7, where visible presence on campus, where the message was constantly there. Like in the main Quatso at Indiana University, there's a huge field called Dunn Meadow that is adjacent to the student union building. And it's not next to any classrooms, so protests aren't going to disrupt anything. And it's a huge space anyway. The protests don't take up very much of it, or the tent city or whatever. But members of Congress started hauling university presidents before Congress to grill them about how they weren't getting "quote unquote" anti-Semitism under control at their campuses. And there were a number of prominent Zionists at Columbia, business, I think, professor named Shea Davide, who's Israeli. Hillary Clinton's a professor at Columbia, and there were a number of others. And there are also some famous pro-Palestinian folks at Columbia University. Jeffrey Sachs, formerly Edward Said, who's perhaps the best known of those scholars. So Columbia has always been kind of a hotbed of conflict over this issue. So the Columbia president, I'm blanking on her name, Shafiq something or another. Egyptian American woman who is the president of Columbia University, was called before Congress to testify, and she basically threw her own faculty and students under the bus and was like, yeah, they're being anti-Semitic, and yeah, so and so, that's an adjunct professor here who's been leading an anti-Semitic charge, he's been dismissed. He's no longer with the university, which was a lie. One of many lies that she told in her testimony. And so I guess simultaneously with that, the students at Columbia and whatever faculty were involved in organizing things, set up an encampment, so it began. It spread like wildfire across the country because there was this big conflict between the Zionists and the protesters against Israel's horrific atrocities in Gaza.
You now have a new law in America which actually defines what anti-Semitism is, and this is something that I'm a little surprised to see. But in all honesty, I'm quite happy to see it, because this is what China does. It says you have freedom of speech, but you can't say this, you can't do this, and you can't do this. You have the right to assembly and protest, but it must be peaceful, and you must talk to the people who are sent to talk to you. Now, it's constitutionally guaranteed that if you protest, the government must listen to you. And this is why we don't have very many violent protests in China. Everybody, when I say this, everyone says, what about Tiananmen Square? Okay, well, yeah, that was a violent protest, but it wasn't for about 12 weeks. It was a very, very peaceful, it was a love-in almost. It was a very, very peaceful protest. And when all of the conditions that the students had were met, there was one organizer who said, we can't go home until we've shed blood. And she's now in America, and she met Nancy Pelosi on her arrival in America. So you're telling me that that wasn't an American agitation going on? So yeah, there is occasionally, very, very rarely, a protest inside of China that gets a little aggressive. But for the last 35 years, there's been no violence in protests. And that reason is laws are written on toilet paper, says Seymour Fact. It does seem that way. But the fact is, at least now you have a guide. Whereas before, if I said, look, I hate what I hate what Israel is doing, someone could call me anti-Semitic. And now in America, that if I criticize the government of Israel, I am legally anti-Semitic. So it's a horrible idea, but at least it gives everybody a guideline. Now, this is an example of a bad law that needs to be tested. So when you write a law like this, people are going to go out there and break it just so they can take it to court to fight it on a legal standpoint and then get it kicked out. Because in America, you do have a separation between this governance and the judiciary, which your Supreme Court in America will presumably throw this new anti-Semitism law out of the window, because it is a complete farce. You can't say to people, you can't criticize the government of Israel. Why not? They're doing something wrong. Criticize them.
Yeah, of course. And, of course, in our Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, the First Amendment of the Constitution guarantees freedom of speech and, assembly and so forth, freedom of religion and many other things, with very few exceptions. So basically, you can't advocate violence, threaten somebody, but you can say just about anything else. And yet there have been all these cases in U.S. history where the government has, not the courts, of course, but the Congress or the president have enacted laws saying, oh, you can't say this or that. You can't be against World War I, and we're going to throw you in prison if you protest against World War I. And they did so. And Eugene Debs, socialist presidential candidate from right here in Indiana, Terre Haute, Indiana, spent years in jail, simply for protesting against World War I. He got over 1 million votes for president while he was in prison in 1920.
I remember that. I didn't know he was local to you.
I don't think you remember that, but
well, I mean, I don't remember. I remember reading about it. A guy in prison. Because it's been topical more recently with Donald Trump possibly going to prison, and he could win the presidency from inside a prison. The US of Israel. Trevor, no, I didn't see him yet. I saw he got a fairly good welcome in Paris and in France, but of course the Tibetans are out there.
There was he was very warmly received, and I guess Serbia is getting some high-speed rail soon.
Serbia and China get along very well, as do Hungary and China, and of course that makes them rogues in the European Union.
Okay, so this Way Weary says, no free speech issue here, in my opinion. Universities have every right to not allow camping on campus. Well, except what happened here at Indiana, and it happened at some other universities as well, is that they did allow protest encampments on campus for decades. Here at Indiana, they had one during the Vietnam War. They had one during apartheid. They had one during the first Gulf War, the first Iraq War. I went to that encampment. They had one during the Afghanistan War. I also went to that one. It was never an issue. Although in many places, certainly during the Vietnam War, they did call the cops in. I know they did at Columbia, although they were nowhere near as violent as the police have been this time in many places. But it was never an issue. And what Indiana did was, the night before they called in the cops on the tent city there in Dunn Meadow, they changed the campus regulations to no longer allow tents or other structures of that sort, or even signs, actually, to be in the meadow. So basically, it's completely against the First Amendment, and it was just an arbitrary last-minute decision by this small group of administrators, the president and a few other administrators, who didn't consult with any faculty, which they are supposed to, according to the university's rules, and they didn't. So then they send the cops in. They arrest 30 people, rough some of them up, suspend several of them from campus. The guy, Bryce Green, whose article I just showed you in Electronic Intifada, has been banned from Indiana University's campus for 5 years. So unless that gets overturned, I'm not sure how he's going to complete his PhD.
Right. At a different university. What Way Weary, that's very difficult to say, he or she has made a valid point here. Universities do have the right not to allow camping on campus, but your comment is also correct. The university has the right to ban it, but it has to go through the due process to change the rules from the precedent that was set many, many years ago. If they've been allowing anti-Vietnam, anti-Afghanistan, anti-apartheid, if they've allowed that historically, then they really need to change the rules through the correct process to change the rules. But this is a good point. In the university campuses, there is no requirement to allow freedom of speech. That's a fact. It's like being on social media. You don't need to allow freedom of speech on social media. There was another point that came up there. Put Seymour facts. These protests are peaceful until the US military showed up. And this is the point. This is an excellent point, because if you just leave them there, they're going to listen to their music, they're going to dance, they're going to chat, they're going to have meetings, they're going to shout out, yeah, we protest, blah, blah, blah. But in all truth, unless somebody is going in there to start trouble. So, for example, I saw one video of a Jewish lad who said, I want to walk across here. I want to walk across here. and he was escorted across by the police. You know, he was talking about how, and the police did say to him, for what purpose? What are you going to achieve? You're not going to achieve anything. Now, I watched that and I saw people's comments which said that he's very brave and blah, blah, blah. And then I saw other comments saying what a dickhead he is. Both sides of the same coin. The fact of the matter is, if he doesn't walk across there, this remains peaceful. If he does walk across there and start shouting at people, it may not remain peaceful. And you've got 10,000 people camping and you've got one guy wanting to start trouble. What do you do if you're a police officer? And I used to be one. You remove the person who's causing the trouble. Then they say, I'm being arrested. I'm being arrested for exercising my freedom of speech. You're not. You're being arrested because you're just about to get your head kicked in and we're saving you from yourself. It's a breach of the peace that's being prevented. That's what we had to do as police officers. If there's 100 people there just about to kill one person because he's an idiot, then you remove the idiot. You can't remove the 100 people. Military armor.
In pretty much every case, the idiot or idiots were the Zionist counter protesters. To my knowledge, there hasn't been a single incident of violence other than defending themselves when they were getting physically attacked by the protesters against any counter protesting agitators or any incidents of anti-Semitism. There was an incident at Northeastern University in Boston where a student tried to get the crowd of protesters to chant "kill all Jews," but he was holding an Israeli flag when he said that, because so it was pretty obvious he was, a plant
agitating.
Yes. So he was trying to get them riled up, and didn't succeed, and they told him to get out of there. Private property doesn't get exception to the U.S. Constitution.
A private institution does. It does. The right of freedom of speech does not apply on this platform, for example. We don't have freedom of speech on YouTube. And it's the same. You come to my house and you start talking about things I don't like, there's no issue with freedom of speech in my house, because I say, can you not talk about that? And if you continue, I ask you to leave. You can't say, oh, you're denying me my right to freedom of speech, because it's my house, it's my property. I dictate the rules. And the same thing applies. Now, I know, John, you did put up that they get their funding from the federal government and therefore should be open, but they don't get all their funding, and there are exceptions. And
lots of these universities are public universities. You're not private. They are, funded by the government. And even at the private ones, the students, that's their home. They're paying thousands of dollars a year to live there. So how can you say that, as many of these administrations have said, how can you say that the students are trespassing on their own campus? That's absurd.
So John Doe has just put up that the difference between personal property and private property, where there is public access. Now, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying what's right and what's wrong. I'm just saying how it is. The people who are in the campus walls, inside of the campus walls, are not on public property. They're on property that has public access. And this is it's up to the lawyers to decide. It's not up to us to decide what's right and what's wrong. But the fact is, the university can say, we don't want this to happen inside of our campus. Flag waving can be dangerous. There was a British member of parliament, Suella Braverman, I think it was, and she was Home Secretary a couple of years ago. Oh, not that long ago, about 9 months ago. She actually wrote a letter to the commissioners and chiefs of police to say that waving a Palestinian flag should be considered an offense. Because if you wave a Palestinian flag, and I don't know why she allows that, why she doesn't allow that, when she did allow the waving of an ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement's flag, which is actually a designated terrorist organization. And she allowed that, but she wouldn't allow the flag of Palestine, which is recognized by the United Nations.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, the incident this person is talking about, some pro-Israeli woman tried to claim, and there was video of the incident, although it wasn't really that clear what happened, but it was clear enough that you could say nobody intentionally stabbed her in the eye or hit her in the eye or anything. Maybe she just got in the way as someone was walking by while they were carrying a flag. That's what appears to have happened. And so, the pro-Israel people, the Zionists, made a big deal of this and said, "Oh, look, the protesters are violent." And of course, the violence is coming, from, well, obviously from Israel. Students not only can't protest or attend classes at Palestinian universities. I mean, there's no university for them to go to. They've all been blown up by Israel.
Vulnerable, yeah.
Of course, the reason those students are protesting is because Israel has murdered tens of thousands of people and made 2 million people homeless and is starving half the territory and of Gaza and so on and so forth. That's why they're protests. So whatever, even if all the claims that the Zionists have made about the protests were true, it still pales into comparison to what Israel is doing, and most or all of them are not true. But it's amazing how many different excuses the administrators at these college campuses and their defenders have come up with for why these protests, can't be allowed. They said they were disruptive to campus life or classes, even though the vast majority of them were nowhere near classroom buildings. They were out in the quad or whatever, big open spaces where the tents took up a tiny part of the space, and they weren't blocking the sidewalk or anything like that. They weren't disrupting classes or anything.
There's a bottom line here, Jeff. The bottom line, and there is a bottom line here. In other protests, these are acceptable. In anti-Israel protests, they're not. And that is where something needs to be sorted out. We can't sort it out. John's absolutely right here. We're all on the same side, John. I'm not arguing or debating. And I agree that this shouldn't happen, but it does happen. And you'd need to see what the individual charter of every university says about this before you can comment on it. I don't know what the charter of Columbia University says. It may very well be that Columbia are acting absolutely within the law, or it may be they're acting absolutely outside the law. I don't know. So I'm not arguing about this. I'm just telling it as it is. You don't get the right of freedom of speech everywhere you go. The government gives you the right of freedom of speech, but platforms like this don't have to. Even Trump, not Trump, what's his name? Elon Musk says he gives freedom of speech, but doesn't. He doesn't have to.
Okay, but the issue beyond that is that even if we grant that private universities have the right to restrict protests on their campus, not allow tents or whatever, the violence of the response to this, where the police came in and beat people up and tear gassed them, and at Emory University they shot rubber bullets at them. At Washington University in St. Louis, presidential candidate Jill Stein and many others were assaulted by cops with their bikes. At Emory University, the cops shot rubber bullets at protesters, which, of course, although they're called rubber bullets, they can potentially be lethal, or at the very least, they can break your arm or something like that. The only danger that these protests, that was associated with these protests was, the cops, and also in some cases, particularly at UCLA, the Zionist counter protesters. So at UCLA, there were about a mob of about 200 pro-Israel people that physically attacked the demonstrators, tried to beat them up and tear gassed them and maced them and shot fireworks at them, and just on and on and on. here at Indiana, they played. There was a pro-Jewish organization that had a fraternity-like house, or is one, across the street from the encampment, and they played very loud music until very late in the night, a lot of nights. And I forgot to mention, Indiana, as well as a number of other universities, had the cops bring in snipers. There was a sniper on the roof of Dunn Meadow, and the cops pulled their guns on people. At Columbia, a police officer actually shot his gun inside the administration building when the cops were making their arrests. And there was just, fortunately nobody's died so far, but there's just been an incredible amount of violence against these.
I wonder how many people. I wonder if right at the very beginning, Huang Tuo said it was Kent State University that changed the path of the Vietnam War. And I'm not sure if that's absolutely true or it was changing anyway. I mean, I wasn't even around. I was around, but I wasn't following that. I was in the UK. But certainly it gets to a point where people start dying in America before things start happening in other places in the world that America is supporting. It's pretty sad. Go on.
Yeah, that may have been part of what turned the tide, but the bigger picture is that there was just a lot of dissent all across the country, and is today. The poll came out just the other day, finding for the first time that the majority of I'm not sure.
Talk about the Constitution there.
Yeah.
This is a good question. This is a very good question. As a former police officer, I can give you the answer in the UK anyway. If you have a trespasser, you do have the right to remove that trespasser using what's called minimum amount of force necessary. So you can say to the trespasser, I'd like you to leave, and they leave. That's the minimum amount of force. If you don't say that and you just pick them up by the hair and pull them out, you've assaulted that person. If they say, I'm not leaving, you can grab them by the arm and you can pull them out, because that's the minimum force. If they start to kick you and you put them into some kind of a hold so that they can no longer kick you, it may be you are literally picking him up or her up and turning them upside down and carry them off. That's the minimum amount of force necessary to avoid an injury to yourself or someone else. So it's a very, very tenuous word, minimum amount of force necessary. Basically, that's what it means. It means you escalate it if they escalate. But what's happening in America is the escalation is starting. These guys are all, they look like they're just about to take Desert Storm. They're on their way to Baghdad, but they're not. They're going in there because a bunch of beatniks are having a party, and they're going to remove them, and they're going to remove them with the maximum amount of force necessary by the looks of it.
Exactly. It's very inappropriately over the top levels of force. And again, the issue of how exactly are students, particularly if it's a public university, how exactly are students trespassing if they're protesting on the campus of their own university in a space that has been historically the site of protests for decades and decades.
There's precedents there. They have the right under those precedents. They have the right. Hi, Kevin.
Dating back all the way to the civil rights movement. Dunn Meadow has been a site of campus protests here at Indiana University.
In theory, from now on, it can no longer be the site of campus protests. But I'll bet you it's allowed if it's not against Israel.
It's the tents that they claimed were the problem, which, that's a ridiculous claim, but that was their claim. So they haven't said that they can't protest. And by the way, last I checked, the tent city is still there. So, basically what's happened at a number of campuses is the cops come in and arrest a bunch of people. There were 30 arrested or something like that the first time here, and another 25 or so the second time. They take the tents down, or take them, and then the next day or a couple of days later, this protesters come back in and set up the tents again. So they're very persistent. And the universities are equally persistent. They there was a case at University of Southern California where, as it so happened, the valedictorian at University of Southern California was a Palestinian American woman, I think Palestinian American or Arab American at any rate. And they banned her from giving her speech at the commencement ceremony. And of course, people were quite unhappy with that. And eventually they just canceled the whole ceremony. They I guess at many universities, they have individual graduation ceremonies, like with each particular school or department or what have you. But the main ceremony, where they have the pomp and circumstance of the speakers, they cancel that. And they have it a number of other places as well. And I guess, here at Indiana, they went ahead with the graduation ceremony. There was a protest, and there were protests at many other campuses. I'm sure this is the case at many other universities, but the reputation of the administration here at Indiana University is just completely in the trash. None of the faculty or the students pretty much respect them anymore. There was a vote of no confidence in President Pamela Whitten by the faculty, where like 90% said, we have no confidence in her. She needs to resign. In general, the faculty are very much in solidarity with the students. There have been a number of cases where faculty have formed a circle around the students in the encampment to try and prevent the cops from arresting them. And of course, the cops' response was to beat up the faculty too. And of course, the university's responses were dead silence.
So let's bring up this last comment here. What does Israel have on Congress for them to oppress? And it's not just Congress. It basically runs through the entire academia. It's running through government. It's running through the judiciary. It's running through the law. What does Israel have? And is it all related to Epstein's book, or is there something much deeper than this?
Well, I mean, that may be part of it, certainly. But I mean, as many of our viewers know, the U.S. government is very corrupt in terms of how people get elected. Basically, big money carries the day, and there are all these billionaires with deep pockets that are very pro-Israel, and they can't directly give huge amounts of money to candidates, but they can funnel it into this or that fund that can advertise either for the candidate or the party. And of course, one of the biggest lobbying groups, or the biggest, I think, by far, is the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, which is the propaganda arm of the Israeli government. So basically, we've had all this crap for all these years about, there's Russian interference. Donald Trump won because Russia interfered with the election, which is complete bullshit. There's no evidence of it. That Russia has interfered with any U.S. election, not that one or any other. Ironically, the U.S. has interfered in Russian elections before. But Israel is very much directly interfering in U.S. elections. And I'm not sure what Confederacy in West Asia is referring to. Okay, gotcha. The Israelis, the Confederacy in West Asia. I actually saw a picture of a house in some rural American place that they didn't have an American flag up. They had a Confederate flag and an Israeli flag.
So West Asia is the new name for the old Middle East, right?
What's that?
West Asia is the new name for the old Middle East.
Correct.
Yeah.
West Africa.
Yeah, that's probably a more appropriate name.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden's received $4 million over the course of his political career from the Israeli lobby, from AIPAC and others. Many Congress people have received hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they're very dependent on this campaign funding. The last I heard, Cori Bush, who's one of the squad, one of the I mean, they're bad on some issues. They're bad on Ukraine, but that most of them have been mostly in opposition to what's going on with Israel, and Cori Bush has very much been so. But there's an AIPAC-funded candidate running against her in the primaries, who last I heard was leading her. So the Israeli lobby is very powerful in American politics.
Right. Is Cori Bush any relation to the Bush family?
No, she's a Black American.
Okay. That's how much I know. Great question there. When will American people wake up? I have this question that I'd love to go on one of these campuses. I'm not going to set foot in America. I'm quite certain that the moment I set foot in America, I'll be wearing handcuffs for the rest of my life. But if I were to go to America and go on those campuses and just chat with those people, I'm 100% behind what they're doing. I'm offering them my full support, and then say, what do you think about China? I bet you every single one of them would think China is an evil, dictatorial, terrible place where no one has any freedoms.
No. Quite a few of them, yes, but probably not the majority, actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
But certainly, and we've talked about this before, how people can be, it's very common for people to be very well informed.
I can hide out in the basement.
Yeah, or you can hide out in mine, or I guess
I've got to get in. I'll have to come in through Darien Gap.
Yeah, gosh, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Sorry. We're talking about whether or not they believe the propaganda on China.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at the polls, sentiment has very much flipped on Israel over the last few months. I mean, there's still a lot of ignorance. I mean, people don't really fully understand the depravity of what Israel is doing, and overestimate the amount of violence against civilians that's come from the Palestinian side, which in comparison to what Israel's doing has been fairly minimal. But not that it's trivial. I don't want to dismiss what happened to Israelis on October 7th, but in comparison to a freaking genocide, it is pretty minor. I don't think most Americans fully understand that, but the polls are showing for the first time that a majority of Americans believe that Israel is committing genocide. Something like 75% of Democrats, Joe Biden's constituency, think that Israel is committing genocide, and largely blame Joe Biden for supporting it. Particularly young people are just totally against what's going on. Something like 85 or 90% of people under about age 30 or 35 are against U.S. Backing of Israel's actions. And
there was a guy recently who said, we don't have a left and right, we don't have a Republican Democrat, we have an old and young problem, because young people have got social media access and are seeing what's really happening, or at least seeing their version of what's really happening. It's a really interesting thing.
As we discussed last month, I guess it was, that's one of the reasons why the government here voted to try and ban TikTok.
Interestingly, it wasn't just TikTok. It was any adversarial software.
They have that option, the president.
They call it the TikTok ban. Talking of bans, I hope everybody notices my my mug, which I bought on Taobao the other day, or a few weeks ago, actually. Apparently, Winnie the Pooh with a balloon. Winnie the Pooh is apparently banned in China. My wife has a Winnie the Pooh apron in the kitchen. They spelled Winnie wrong, but that's okay. It's still Winnie the Pooh. I want to touch on something else, moving away from the campus issues for a moment, if we can. Do you know
one thing
what's going?
before we get to that, I did want to get your take on, just comparing the, because you've talked about this before, and I want to get your take on it in this context, comparing the level of authoritarianism that we're currently seeing from forces here in the U.S. versus China. Like, would the Chinese government do anything remotely resembling this level of violence against people who just strongly disagree with something the government is doing?
We could go back to two events in history and say that the Chinese government do know what they're doing in protests, and they do know how to act when they need to act. First one was Tiananmen, of course. It's 35 years ago, and lessons were learned. But what most people don't realize is that the Tiananmen Square incident took place over a couple of days, but the protests took place over 3 months. So there was months and months of protests before it ever got to that stage. And it's also been proven that there was American money, American influence, American intelligence. George Bush Sr. was CIA at the time, and he was in Beijing just before it happened. There's a lot of factors that indicate that this wasn't an organic movement inside of China. So let's put Tiananmen Square aside.
Soros conspiracy theories are actually true.
Oh, Soros was there. He put in a lot of money. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
This is not a conspiracy theory. These are proven facts now.
Well,
it took a long time.
Conspiracy theory can be proven true. It's a theory, then historical events or evidence can prove it true.
Okay.
I don't know if you saw, speaking of Soros, that people are accusing Soros of funding the campus protests. You know how much it costs to get a tent at Walmart? That is the most common tent you see at these protests. $30.
I saw someone on Twitter saying this must be organized because they've all got the same tent. They all went to Kmart and bought the cheapest tent they could get. It's $30.
Kmart's out of business, Jerry. It's Walmart.
Okay, Walmart, wherever. There's a couple of questions here. I want to bring in the VPN one, John Cronk's VPN one. But first of all, let me finish the protest thing.
Okay.
Hong Kong is a great example. Hong Kong is part of China. The Chinese mainland police were not involved, although I have every reason to suspect they were, but there's no evidence to say that they were. But Hong Kong police managed that very, very well. Very little in the way of police violence. Nobody died at the hands of the police, not one person, which is pretty.
A lot of violence from the protesters, though.
Well, I'm going to come back to that because after we finish talking about America, I want to talk about Hong Kong. China had protests towards the end of the COVID lockdowns. We were not locked down, but many people think we were locked in our houses for 3 years. Nothing of the sort. I went on a 7-week cycling tour during COVID. I went to 40 different cities during COVID. So let's put that aside. There were protests inside of some of the campuses. What happened was the students were saying, we don't like, they didn't ban TikTok. That's a different story. Bring that one back so I can remember the VPN one. Can you bring that one back?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I do want to address that. What happened in the COVID conflict? Is that the right word? No. There were protests in about 40 different cities. There are over 700 cities in China. 40 different cities had protests, and it affected a very, very small number of people. But the government went and listened, and the government said, okay, we're going to take some action on this, and the people went home. That was it. The most serious event that happened during the COVID crisis, during the COVID lockdowns, was that a group of students who were fed up with being online turned up at their school when the school was closed, and the police did a terrible thing. They sent them home. That's it. They went home. And they went home after the head of the campus, the dean of the school, I guess, came out and talked to them and said, okay, this is what's going to happen, and explained what needed to happen, what needed to be done. They all said, okay, thank you very much. And they all went home. That was it. That was how protests are dealt with. So now let's look at this, John. There's a misunderstanding here. Almost no sites in China are banned. The BBC is banned in China because CGTN was banned first in UK. So CGTN UK now exists as CGTN Europe and still has an office in the UK. And they're still operating, but they're banned from broadcasting. Their license was revoked inside of the UK. Fortunately, there's a European Union law that says they're not banned, and so they can broadcast from the European Union and the UK can watch it. But the VPNs are not illegal. VPNs are perfectly legal. They're allowed. What is illegal is trading VPNs. I cannot sell my VPN or sell access to my VPN to other people. Every single student that I've ever taught has got access to a VPN. The schools give access to a VPN. Most of the government offices have VPN. I talk to people on Twitter. You see them all the time. The VPNs are not banned. Sites are not banned. Facebook is banned. BBC is banned. Facebook was banned because in 2009, riots in Tibet and Xinjiang were organized on Facebook. The Chinese government said, can you give us the information that we need to prosecute people guilty of murder? And Facebook said, no, we're not going to do that. So Facebook got banned. Now, all Facebook needs to do is provide the information and they'll be unbanned. Twitter is not banned. YouTube is not banned. Google is not banned. Microsoft Bing is operating perfectly normally inside of China. I can use it all the time. It's not banned. Now, why are they not operating without a VPN? Because they choose not to operate inside of China, because China has a law that says if you operate in China, you store Chinese data inside of China and you allow access for criminal investigations under the normal judicial process. We go to the court, we get an order, we come to you, you give us the information. And they say, we're not prepared to do that for an authoritarian regime. So that's why they're not open. They're definitely not banned. I'm on YouTube now. I'm not using a VPN because I'm on StreamYard, and StreamYard is not banned. It's open in China. I am on StreamYard. My VPN is switched off because it works better without a VPN. So that's the situation. That's the reality. VPNs are not banned. Operating an illegal business on a VPN, yeah, that's banned. If you want to operate a sex business, if you want to be seditious or treasonous or treacherous, if you want to do things that are illegal, they are banned. But the VPN itself is not. You can go to China Mobile and order a VPN, and they will give you one. And it'll be a Chinese authorized VPN, which won't allow you onto some sites like the BBC because it's banned, and it won't allow you onto pornography because all pornography is banned. That's not to say there isn't any. There's plenty, but it's illegal. It is illegal. So that's the situation with VPN. VPNs are allowed everywhere. VPNs are not banned. And the intent of the law is to make sure that China has a clean and relatively well-informed rather than misinformed internet media environment. So there we go. Okay. Next point.
Someone pointed out the U.S. massacre in Panama happened the same year as Tiananmen. Actual people run over by tanks.
Well, no one in Tiananmen was run over by a tank, despite what the rumors say.
Yeah, they're saying that it happened in Panama.
It actually did happen. Yeah, I didn't know about that. Okay, I'll look at that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know about that specific incident. I'll take Shady has his word for it, but I know, quite a few, I think, if I remember correctly, a few hundred people were killed in Panama. And of course, the next year, I believe, either 90 or 91, I'd have to check, the Gulf War happened, the first U.S. Invasion of Iraq, a bunch of people killed. So the U.S. has no business,
criticizing.
Not criticize China, but it's totally hypocritical for them to criticize China for engaging in violent repression, because it happens here all the fucking time. So
yeah. Let's move on to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know if any of the viewers are following what's happening in the Hong Kong courtrooms right now. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, over a period of time, there is a court case going on. Okay, thank you, Shady. There's a court case going on in Hong Kong right now. It has been proven, not alleged, proven, that there were two plots in Hong Kong to put bombs into protests, to murder innocent civilians and to murder as many police officers as possible. There was an AR-15 sniper rifle involved in this. There was training taking place. Chinese Hong Kong people were taken to Taiwan, where they were trained. I don't know who by, not yet, but we're gonna find out in the court case who was doing the training. One guy had so much money that he gambled 300,000 Hong Kong dollars, and that was just to relieve himself from the pressures that he was under with all the training and the bombing. And they had the money to set up bomb factories inside of one of their campuses. They had a massive bomb factory. They were buying equipment. They were buying lots of equipment to basically kill lots of people. And by sheer good fortune, more than anything else, the police got wind of it and they were able to thwart it. The court case is going on now, and I've seen nothing on BBC, nothing on ABC, nothing on CNN, nothing on Fox News. None of the Western media are covering this, but it is being covered in Hong Kong. And I suggest everybody who doesn't know anything about this, go take a look, because we're talking massive, massive injections of money. We're talking training taking place in Taiwan, where we know for a fact there are military trainers, US military trainers, and we're talking about these huge problems going on inside of Hong Kong at the time of the protests. The Hong Kong police, students literally built bombs, which fortunately did not get used. That's a fact. They had a plan to put a bomb at the front of a demonstration. When the demonstration protest march reached this point, it would detonate. The police would then push everybody back into a public park in some enhanced perception of safety, where there was another bomb to be laid. So they were going to kill innocent people. At the same time, there's a guy on a roof with a sniper rifle taking out the police, and there were snatch squads on the ground to take the guns from the fallen police officers. That was what was going on in Hong Kong in 2019. Yeah, freedom bombs. And who was responsible and who was behind that? That information has not yet come out. It'll be in the court in the next few days.
I can't imagine who was behind it.
No, of course, I don't know. I'm not going to hazard any guesses that it starts with U and ends in A. Joshua Wong is a terrorist. Yeah, I think Joshua Wong is probably a terrorist. He certainly is a misguided young man, and I'm hoping his time in prison will. I hope he gets de-radicalized and he comes out of prison a better man. That's what I hope. He went in as a bad boy.
Could you maybe fill in viewers briefly on who Joshua Wong is?
Yeah, Joshua Wong is one of the leaders of the Hong Kong pro-demista movement. He was not in himself. He was not a terrorist. He didn't engage in terrorist activities, but he was an organizer of people who were, and he was paid by the US. He met with people in US. It may be a coincidence that the United States consulate in Hong Kong was involved in this. Joshua Wong is a Quislin, yeah. And yeah, he's got some friends. One of them is Agnes Chow, who's in Canada now, and there's a price on her head. Another one is Nathan Law, who's in the UK. There's another one in Australia. These are people who the Chinese government would like to bring back to Hong Kong and face trial, at least answer to their charges, because there are genuine charges against these people. They are, and I don't mince about my words with allegations and stuff like that. Normally I'd say they are alleged terrorists. These people are proven terrorists now, proven by association with people who are convicted terrorists. So there's something really interesting there. Yeah, there's an embassy in Hong Kong. It's actually a consulate, but yeah, That's right. This is why America never gets overturned, because they don't have US embassies. Jimmy Lai on trial at the same time. Yeah, 17-year-old kid with 3 million in cash. Yeah, where does that come from? Jimmy Lai is the owner of the Apple newspaper, and he is on trial right now, and he's going down for a very long time, I'm sure, if he's found guilty. And Joshua Wong is already in prison. He's staying there for quite a while. And the court case that's going on is separate to the Jimmy Lai court case. There's 2 court cases right now, which we're not seeing in Western media. And why are we not seeing it? Because it proves that the Hong Kong 2019 protests, now, when they started in 2018, those protests were genuine. They had social problems, they had housing problems, they had education problems, they had inequality problems, they had all kinds of problems, and they needed addressing. And then when they protested, they were addressed. That's the issue. All of the things that they protested about in 2018 were all addressed, and then they came out with more. Every time an issue was addressed, they changed the goalposts. And now we've got a situation where the police have caught these kids, mostly kids, put them on trial. Jimmy Lai is a 70-year-old man, but mostly he was paying kids to do this. Lots and lots of money. You know, people say the protesters got 200 Hong Kong dollars. Yeah, the protesters did. But if they stabbed a policeman, they got a lot more. The guy one of the guys who's in court right now was, if the bomb had activated at one of the shopping centers in Wan Chai, if the bomb had been successful, he was going to get a bonus of $1 million. I think it's Hong Kong dollars, which is 150,000 US dollars or thereabouts. But he was going to get $1 million. Yeah. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and you know what? One of the main smears against the protesters has been, Jerry, here in the college campus protests, that they were led by outside agitators.
Yes. And you know why they say that? Because it's exactly what they do. They're led by outside agitators. I had somebody the other day saying China was organizing them. China doesn't give a shit. China does not care what happens in America. China doesn't care who gets elected. It's not going to make any changes. You know, Jill Stein could make some changes, I think, but China's not going to interfere in that election, because that's not what China does. China wants Americans to make their own decisions.
That's oh gosh, what was I going to say?
Yeah, Sweetin Yap says it would be great if you could invite Nuri Vitachi. Nuri Vitachi is a journalist in Hong Kong. I have tried. Nuri and I get along quite well, but he's not responsive to my reaching out. I've tried a couple of times to reach him. I know people who know him personally, so I might try an alternate route. But Nuri has cited me many times. He's actually read one of my articles on his show. He has a YouTube site called Friday Every Day. One word, Friday Every Day. Let me put that up. Yeah, if you could put that up, because I can't put this up. Friday Every Day is Nuri Vitachi's YouTube site, and it's a media outlet. He runs an independent media outlet called Friday Every Day, and it's very well worth following. He's a brilliant writer. He's a Sri Lankan-born British, and he's been in Hong Kong, I think, about 40 years, a long, long time, decades in Hong Kong. And he quite openly admits that he used to be part of the anti-China narrative. Then he got involved in the Hong Kong protests because he was supportive of what they were trying to do. This was back in the 2018 days when Hong Kong had some genuine issues. So then he did that. Then he realized, hang on, we're being manipulated here. We've got what we wanted. Now things are changing. This is not, he used to take his kids out to the protest. His family would go out for the day to protest to make things better in Hong Kong. And he was anti-China. He's not now, because he now realizes, and this is a guy who worked in the system, he realizes the system is corrupt. He's worked in media. He's worked for the BBC. He's worked for the Telegraph. He's worked for the Guardian. He's worked for many different media outlets. Nuri is awesome. I agree. Could not said that better myself. In fact, I did just say it. Yeah.
Can I just share a few of the more amusing claims that have been made about the protests, the college protests? I mean,
Sure.
It's hilarious, some of the stuff that folks have said. Let me, not that one, but this one. So here's somebody mocking what they're saying. They say this really cannot be more simple. Forcibly occupying private space is illiberal coercion, not protest. Imagine dozens or hundreds of people sitting in at a business, a department or drugstore perhaps, and refusing to leave unless their demands were met, not to be tolerated. Now, what
it's got nearly 500,000 views as well. Why is it when I put something out, I get 1,000 views?
Well, because people are picking up on their point. Americans, I guess, are reading this and picking up on their point that this is exactly what the civil rights movement did. They sat in at lunch counters and on the bus and so on and so forth, and their protests were not tolerated and considered illegitimate and coercion and so forth. But that's why they worked. But lots of people have been saying, oh, you can't occupy an administration building or whatever. That's not even protest. That's violent because you broke a window to get in the building. While meanwhile, Palestinian universities have been blown off the face of the earth. And there's so many. Nancy Pelosi, of course, said that Russia was behind the protests. I mentioned that Soros was behind them, and then there's the outside agitator claim. But the New York Post had a couple of real gems. COVID shutdowns and isolation to blame for pro-Palestine protests, experts say.
Okay.
And then
that's interesting.
Yeah. And then there was this one.
Well, that's one of your posts.
Yeah. I mean, I shared their headline that I came across. This one's even better.
Oh, I saw this one. Yeah. So what was happening in the 1960s and 70s? Were they getting enough then?
Oh, I don't know. I guess there wasn't. Free love was a myth. Yeah.
I don't know. I was too young, but they say if you can remember the 60s, you weren't there. I do remember the 60s. I was 2 when they started and 12 when they finished. This is a really interesting one because I mean, in China, they would just say, well, college students, do you know college students don't have sex? Some do, of course, but most of them don't. They say, well, I'll wait until I'm finished my studies. And you'll quite commonly find 22, 23-year-old virgins in China. It's very common.
Really? Huh, interesting. Yeah. Well, no wonder the population's dropping.
I'm sure they make up for it once they decide they're going to go. Yeah,
hopefully. Next
they'll blame global warming on COVID. I do get the connection. COVID created a kind of an imbalance, a mental imbalance, a mental health issue, and there may be a link towards that. But it's really interesting that someone is saying this is Seymour's a 50-year-old virgin. Is it Victory Day for Russia?
May 8th. Yes, it is. Wednesday, May 8th.
Okay.
And did you hear that?
I've got it. This is their May parade. I was thinking, is it Victory Day? Has something happened in Ukraine?
No. It's celebration of victory in World War II. Germany has banned Victory Day celebrations and banned Russian flags from being flown, and the list goes on. They can't have anybody praising Russia for beating the Nazis because, of course, Nazism never completely went away in Germany.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, as Shady has and I can rightly point out, it's now the 9th of May where we are.
Okay, so John Doe says, what victory they defeated in Germany, but not Nazism? Well, I mean, that's true, but I'm not sure how they could have. For one thing, fascism was supported by so many other countries besides Germany, including, of course, the United States, which protected Nazis as much as they could. Spirited them away to the United States, where, among other things, they were involved in developing this U.S. space program to Latin American countries. Quite a few of them are in Canada. They're everywhere, including in Germany.
Well, let's bring this point into a more modern context and say Israel are currently trying to defeat Palestine. They can kill all the people in Gaza. They're trying to. They can kill all the people who identify as Palestinians, but they cannot kill the ideology of the people of, for example, Hamas. They say, we're going to destroy Hamas. They're not. They're never going to destroy Hamas. It will just come back as something else. You cannot destroy that. You can destroy the people. You can destroy the buildings. Same thing in Germany. Why don't China and Russia have this problem? I'm not sure about Russia, but China has a meritocracy. You cannot get to the top without being popular, because you need the support of your peers. You need to be dragged up from above. You need to be pushed up from below. So you need to be efficient. You need to be popular in order to be elected. If you are corrupt, it's very hard to be elected, because people say, I'm not going to vote for that guy. He's corrupt. I'm going to vote for someone who's not. But you also need to be very, very good at your job. There are corrupt people. There's no question about that. But it's very, very difficult to be systemically or systematically corrupt inside of China now. You can be individually corrupt, but it's very, very difficult to have a corrupt system in China right now. And the reason why China doesn't have this problem of people like that in great power is because they're removed. There is an organization, and people don't realize this in the West, the National People's Congress has the power to remove the people that they appoint to manage the country. This really is a proletarian dictatorship. That's what China is, according to its constitution.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up. He's asking, why don't China and Russia have this problem? And I would say, number one, both China and Russia had proletarian revolutions, and even in Russia, where that was eventually rolled back, there's still a legacy of that there. And number two, neither China nor Russia has ever been a colonial or settler colonial power. The United States is a settler colonial as well as colonial country, and so they have that legacy, a centuries-long legacy of violence and corruption. That's going to have lasting effects. On the other hand, China and to an extent Russia have a legacy of doing various good deeds, defeating Nazi colonialism, more so than any other country did, and having had a sort of socialism for many decades. Then it was overturned, and they had an era of Wild West capitalism for about 10 years, and there was a strong reaction against that. So
it went into under Brezhnev, after Brezhnev, it went into this American-style unfettered capitalism, and the inequality gap just grew exponentially. So you had very, very rich oligarchs, and you had very poor people. China is doing all it can at the moment to narrow that. The Gini coefficient in China is getting smaller every single year. And in America, the Gini coefficient is getting larger. What that means is the gap between the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor, is widening. Whereas in China, the gap between the rich and the poor is narrowing. And there are still very rich people in China, and a lot of them as well. I mean, you just walk out of my front door, and I guarantee you'll see a Porsche within a couple of minutes. You'll see a Maserati within half an hour. You won't see many Lamborghinis or Ferraris, because I think people just don't like them. They're a bit ostentatious. But the Maserati sedan car, very, very nice. Maseratis and Porsche SUVs, there's lots of them here. BMWs are 2 a penny, Mercedes-Benz. There's plenty of money here. But the efficiency, the Gini coefficient is narrowing all the time. And every single year it gets a little bit smaller. So what that means is the middle class is getting bigger, much bigger. The middle class of China now is bigger than Europe and America's population combined. That's what happens when you have a good managed city, a good managed country.
Yeah. And speaking of that era of, massive inequality and oligarchs, corrupt oligarchs running the show in Russia during the 90s, Jeffrey Sachs gets a lot of praise these days, the Columbia economist, because of course he's critical of of Israel and he takes the Russian side in the Ukraine war. But one thing people seldom remember is that he was one of the economists who was behind the crashing of the Russian economy in the 90s. I have extremely mixed feelings about Jeffrey Sachs. And not to mention he pushes crazy conspiracy theories about the origin of COVID. But aside from that, he helped crash the Russian economy in the 90s.
A couple of points. The speaking the truth, the middle class in China, it was 400 million. It's heading towards 800 million now. It's going to be the largest middle. It already is the largest middle class in one country anywhere in the world. And there's another comment there on the Gini coefficient. It is skewed, and it has made China look more unequal. But the reality is China is a very egalitarian society now. When I came here in 2004, it was quite rare to have a friend who had a car. Now it's very rare to have a friend who doesn't have a car, and some of them have 2 and a motorbike. They've still got a motorbike, which they've kept for years. So I mean, just the fact that people are now driving their own cars. We have freeways and highways all over the place, dotted around. They built 177 kilometers of highway. Forget the roads in the cities and towns. This is highway. What the British call a motorway. Some people call it a freeway. But the toll roads that go into city, the 177,000 kilometers of them. So it's basically China has invested in itself, and the results are very, very significant and very visible. Oh, I didn't know that. Because they're cheaper. This is another thing. There's no overcapacity and there's no subsidization. They're cheaper because they have a reasonable profit margin. And Jack was subsequently he's wrong on COVID and climate. I don't know enough of his COVID and climate. He's quite good on China.
What did he say about climate?
I don't know. John maybe can tell us.
I guess Sachs pushes the theory that it came out of the U.S. somehow.
Right.
But quite a few people who are good on many issues are caught up in pushing this or that conspiracy theory. This particular one reflects badly on China, of course.
I'll let the science.
Yeah.
Follow Jeffrey. He's honest, Jerry. Your guest's not. Okay. He's not my guest. I'm his guest today. So I don't know, Evan. I don't know, and I can't say because I watch Jeffrey Sachs occasionally when he speaks on Russia, when he speaks on China, and I've seen that he is pretty honest on that. I don't know what he's talking about when he's talking about Wuhan or COVID, or I've never seen any of that. So I'm interested in what he has to say about China.
I'm honest about, because I'm just stating, what Jeffrey Sachs's positions are, and I and what my opinion on his positions is. He is against Israel's genocide. He's against the fascistic nature of the Ukrainian government, and he's a conspiracy theorists when it comes to the origins of COVID. And,
Well,
if you look at the science about it, there's no evidence.
There's one thing that I would say about him.
There just isn't.
Because of his position, he's better informed than we are. So he may know stuff we don't know.
About what?
He's better informed than we are. He's sat in on committees. He's chairman of a couple of committees that relate to COVID. He knows stuff that we don't know. I'm not arguing. I'm not even going to enter a debate about this because I don't know. But he must have access to material that we don't have.
Well, I mean, the scientific literature is open for anybody to look at, and there just is, tons of evidence that COVID originated in nature and spilled over to humans in the Hunan and to some extent other markets. And there just isn't any evidence at this point that it came out of a lab.
The problem with this is
right now,
it's never going to be resolved in our lifetime, Jeff. Let's just leave it alone. It's not going to be resolved in our lifetime. I don't disagree with you, but I can't agree with you because I don't know enough. So I'm just going to let this one go. He's head of Lancet, the British Medical.
No. He's head of a committee that Lancet appointed. Yeah. He's not. I mean, he's not a scientist. He's an economist.
Yeah. So he gets a lot of criticism. Let's just leave it there. Move on. No point in debating something that the science is still out there. We just don't know. There is no question whatsoever that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was working on coronavirus. That's never been a debate. It was. Right. There is no question whatsoever that US were funding it to do this. That's not a matter for debate. The debate is whether the ones they were working on were the ones that got out and whether they did get out. And the truth of the matter is there's no evidence that it did. It just so happened that inside of Wuhan, there was an outbreak. But that outbreak was also in other places. And it was Wuhan that discovered it. So it becomes the Wuhan virus, the same way that the Spanish flu was discovered in Spain, but it didn't start in Spain. So the Wuhan Institute of Virology, whether or not it was working on this particular coronavirus strain, I don't know. But that information has been made available to the World Health Organization, and they haven't come out and said anything about it.
Yeah. So, well, it's important to distinguish also between whether or not there were any cases of COVID in humans other than the ones that were detected in Wuhan. That's one thing, but we know that the first mass outbreak was in Wuhan, and we know the geographic location of those initial cases in Wuhan, which is a very big city. So, those are things that we know. We know that they were centered around the market and not anywhere near the lab. That's just what we know from hospital data.
But there's also evidence that the same coronavirus was in Spain, it was in Italy, it was in the United States. It was already out and about before it was discovered in Wuhan. So
there's evidence that suggests that was possible, but again, you have to have a virus in a big city in order for a major outbreak to occur. There has to be enough people around to kind of get the ball rolling, and there just aren't that many places in the world where that is possible.
Anyway, let's move on. Are we going to wrap this up? We're coming up towards 2 hours now.
Okay, anything else you want to?
No, I wanted to get the Hong Kong court cases out into the open. I think that this is being obviously this is deliberately squashed because it does show that Hong Kong was an interfered revolution in process, terrorist revolution, organized by someone outside of Hong Kong with lots and lots of dollars.
Yeah.
So That was all I wanted to get out today.
Yeah. It's, I mean, the U.S. is a king of outside agitation, no doubt about it. Yeah, I mean, just to finish up on the protests, there are some hopeful signs. There have been a number of universities where the administration has agreed to appoint a committee to look into their investment portfolio and put students on the committee. And there's also a couple of universities that are actually divesting. And there are also a few universities that haven't sixed the cops on the protesters so far, which is an encouraging sign that they're not all crazy.
Yes, I think any organization that says we're going to put a committee or an inquiry or something, and we'll do this, and we'll put it to the vote at the next meeting. One of them broke up because they're going to vote in October on this. I can't see that as a victory. You're kicking the can down the road, and there's kids in Gaza dying.
I'm not saying it's a victory. I'm saying that it's a step that most other universities haven't taken. Most other universities are taking a very hard line against the protests, and we know that the protesters won in the 80s against South African apartheid. They will win this as well. It may take a while, but I think they're going to win. And also, it's obvious at this point, and we've talked about this before, that Israel will not be able to defeat Hamas in Gaza and the resistance in general. They do not have the capacity to defeat it, even with U.S. help. So,
no.
A lot of people are going to die before that happens. So, unfortunately, but there's hope for the future.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, it's been a great conversation, and I appreciate all the wonderful comments that people have made as well. And we've had over 100 people watching officially throughout, so that's great.
Thank you, everyone.
We will see you in about a month. Take care, everybody.
Somewhere around a month.
Yeah. All right.